Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Helen Seslowski. I'm the events director for Oblong Books. Before I welcome our guests this evening, I have a few instructions for those of you who've not attended our events before. If you want to ask a question of either of our authors this evening, you can do so in the chat, which you'll find at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can enter your question at any time and we'll address them at the end of the program. And your questions can be for either Carol or Melissa or both authors. So please make sure to put that before you write your question. For those of you who have not already read either of these books, you may buy signed copies of them through the Buy the Book button, which you'll find a green button at the bottom of your screen. If you prefer to get your literature audibly, there is a link at the top of the chat. If you scroll up, there is a link to purchase the audio book of both Carol's book and Melissa's book through Libro FM, and you'll be supporting Oblong Books when you make that purchase as well. So we're delighted this evening to welcome back a very dear friend of Oblong Books and of mine, I'm honored to say, a local favorite thriller author, Carol Goodman. And she's joining us this evening with her latest novel, The Stranger Behind You, that just came out yesterday from William Morrow Publishers. And here it is. I think I'm reflecting, but there you go. Fabulous cover. Great cover. Congratulations, Carol.
Thank you.
Author Danielle Trussoni called The Stranger Behind You a captivating exploration of sexual harassment, friendship, ambition, and how women join together to overcome trauma. It's as classic as it is timely, as heartbreaking as it is suspenseful. Carol Goodman is the author of 23 novels. Am I right, Carol? 23?
Thank you.
23, including her earlier novels, The Lake of Dead Languages, The Seduction of Water, which won the 2003 Hammett Prize, The Widow's House, which won the 2018 Mary Higgins Clark Award, and The Night Visitors, most recently, which won the 2020 Mary Higgins Clark Award. Her books have been translated into 16 languages. She lives in Hudson Valley with her family, and she teaches literature and writing at the New School and SUNY New Paltz. Also joining us this evening, and we're very happy to have her, is author Melissa Larsen. And Melissa's going to talk to Carol about The Stranger Behind You and discuss her own fantastic debut, a marvelous thriller entitled Shutter. There it is. Another and the blues are very evocative of each other, I've noticed. Another fabulous cover. And that was published on June 15th from Berkeley Books. Melissa holds an MFA from Columbia University and a BA from NYU's Gallatin School of Individualized Study. She's worked extensively in publishing, and she's joining us today from San Francisco. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you both join us. I'm going to hand off to you, and I'll see you back at the end to conduct questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. And thanks Oblong for having us. This is so exciting to be here with, and I know there are a lot of friends from Hudson Valley in the audience, and I think also friends of Melissa and I were at the same writers retreat, and I think there are some people there.
I've seen some names, very familiar names. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So Carol, just to begin, I'd love to hear a little bit of a reading, just to hear it in your voice.
Oh, great. I would love to do that. Thank you, Melissa. So I'm just going to read like about 5 minutes, and it's from the prologue. Interestingly, Helen said before we went on air, she said, this is one of your few books where I didn't hear your voice in it as much. And then I was thinking, no, neither of these characters are quite me. So this starts in actually the voice of Joan. I think we just lost. There you are. You're back. Okay. That could happen. I mean, I was afraid it could happen here because of thunder in the area, but hopefully we'll all stay on.
I've had some issues,
okay.
But hopefully we're okay.
Well, hopefully you'll stay there.
I'm going to pop in just to say, Carol, before you start, that if your picture goes fuzzy, just hang in there and refresh. And sometimes your audio stays in, so not to worry.
Okay. Well, we will manage. We were on a practically deserted island off the coast of Maine. We're tough women. So here's the beginning in Joan Laurie's voice. I have noticed in my professional capacity that when someone makes a point of saying that they're not lying, that usually means they are. When the realtor brags that she hasn't lied about the view, though, I have to admit that her claim is demonstrably true. The view is spectacular. Standing at the Ellicott Bay window, it's as if I am perched on a cliff overlooking the river. There's nothing between me and the Palisades but water and light. A person who is afraid of heights would be terrified. But heights aren't what I am afraid of. Can you tell me what state-of-the-art security means? The realtor takes a nanosecond, an eon in Manhattan real estate time, to recalibrate and then rattles off the specs again. 24-hour doorman, fiber optic alarm system, security cameras. As I mentioned earlier, a high-ranking government official lived here. I can't tell you who. Her voice trails off, suggesting that she very well could if she chose to. All I'd have to do is raise my eyebrows, smile, lean in a little closer. All the body language that implies that it will just be between us girls. I've done it 1,000 times before with ex-wives and mistresses, corporate CFOs, and underpaid personal assistants. But I don't. I don't really care who the very important person was who lived here. I just want to be assured that he or she lived here safely and unbothered. Can you show me how the camera works? We walk to the front door, steel, fireproof, 3 locks, including a titanium deadbolt that slides into place with the precision of a Mercedes engine. And she touches the screen mounted on the wall of the alcove. A picture emerges of the sidewalk outside the lobby. Leaf shadow dances along the pavement, a patch of the park bordering the building. We might be in a bosky glen. A uniformed doorman stands to one side, hands folded behind his back, with all the good posture and reserve of a Buckingham Palace guard. That's not a bad view either, the realtor remarks. It takes me a moment to realize she's commenting on the doorman's physique. He's young, dark-eyed, with black curly hair. Irish, I remember, from the accent I detected when he greeted us. Probably from the Riverdale neighborhood to the north, where Irish immigrants still live. And yes, he's handsome. Does the building do security checks on all the staff, I ask? Of course, she says, her voice turned chilly since I didn't engage in her man-ogling. There's an unwritten code that women are supposed to join in on certain subjects. Hunky, working-class men, chocolate, wine. I feel her eyes flick up and down my severe outfit, black jeans, boots, black blazer over plain white t-shirt, scarf wound twice around my neck, even though it's a hot July day outside. Gay, she's thinking. On the monitor, the Irish doorman looks up and to the left to tell that someone's lying, but in this case, also a surreptitious glance at the camera. For a second, his eyes seem to meet mine in an amused complicity. Not gay, they seem to say. Then the realtor swipes the screen and the view in the front of the building is replaced by the interior of the lobby. 12-foot high ceilings, marble floors, damask upholstered couches and chairs. A bit threadbare, I'd noticed on the way in, but in that old money style of pre-war apartments and clubs. As we watch, an elderly woman walks her elderly poodle, their hair the same texture and shade of apricot, from the elevator to the front door, which magically opens at her approach. The hunky doorman is on his toes. The realtor, Marla, wipes the screen again, and a view of the hallway outside this apartment's door appears. You can set the camera so the default is on the hallway, Marla says. Who lives across the hall, I ask. Marla cocks her head and frowns. She thinks I'm a time waster, despite the reference I came with. She doesn't think I can afford this apartment. 4 weeks ago, she would have been right. And I'm not asking the right questions. I haven't asked if the fireplace works or if the advertised washing machine is top or front loading. All the details that constitute bona fide miracles in New York City real estate. I haven't even asked to see the clawfoot tub or the walk-in closets. I can't divulge any details about the residents, but I can assure you they've all been carefully vetted by the co-op board. Is it a man? I ask. That's all I need to know. Her eyes widen. Maybe not even gay, she's thinking. Maybe asexual. But then she smiles pityingly. A sweet old lady lives there in her 90s. You won't hear a peep out of her, Miss Laurie. And then her eyes get even bigger and her mouth forms a round O. Laurie, she repeats. And I curse myself for not using a fake name. Joan Laurie? Aren't you the one who wrote that story in Mata Hatta exposing Caspar Osgood? I could deny it. Joan Laurie's not so rare a name, but I'll have to pass a financial check to get the apartment anyway. Yes, guilty. I mean, was. Marla throws back her head and hoots. All East Side Reserve falling away. Was he ever? 4 more women have come forward to say he assaulted them. One of them was only 18 when she interned at the Globe. The pig! What I don't understand is how he got away with it for so long. Money, I say, and the power money gets you. He paid off the women he could, and the women who wouldn't take the money weren't believed because Caspar Ward Osgood, Mayflower descendant, owner of the Globe, Pulitzer Prize winner, married man with 2 children, couldn't possibly be molesting 20-something women. No one wanted to go up against him. You did, Marla says, looking into my eyes for the first time this morning. I'm taken aback by the candid look. And then she says, I wish I'd had you to talk to 6 months ago. And I understand. She has a story too. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just instantly brought back to the Refuge.
Yes, which is the name of the apartment building. Which is so just to that's where she does take that apartment. Who wouldn't? I expect to cause real estate envy in all my readers.
I just was reading the first page, the first chapter to get into it today, and I just looked up and I was at page 50 because I wanted to be in the Refuge. I'm really upset that this building doesn't exist.
I know. And if it did, I know I would not be able to afford it.
I certainly would not.
No, not until so.
Maybe to cat sit. But this leads perfectly into my first question, which is the history of the Refuge, the setting, which is so enormous in this novel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the Refuge, which was so much fun to create, even though it does have a really sad and tragic history. So my idea for this building is that it was originally a Magdalene laundry in New York City, in Inwood Park, which is the northernmost, for those who don't know, it's the northernmost neighborhood of Manhattan. It happens also to be where my husband has an office and both my daughters live. So I'm familiar with it. And my surprise was that I discovered through reading, I was reading a number of articles, specifically one by Michelle Jones, who wrote about women's prisons. And she mentions Magdalene laundries in this country. And I really was kind of shocked because I knew something about the history of Magdalene laundries in Ireland, that, women were remanded there for either because they got pregnant or sometimes just because they were flirtatious, and then stayed there. I mean, it's a really tragic history. But I had no idea that there were these places in this country, and actually there were quite a few. And then I was even more surprised to hear that there'd been one in Inwood, which is a neighborhood I was familiar with. And when I told my husband about it, who grew up in the area and had, is a history buff and had read a lot of local histories, he said he had never heard of that. He had never heard that there was a Magdalene laundry, which immediately started that spidey sense we get when we're like, oh, that's, there's a story there. Just the fact that this existed in New York City, in this neighborhood that I know, and no one seems to know about it, that it's erased from memory. And so then I did a little sleuthing, and I found articles in the New York Times, and it describes the building as this beautiful French chateau, actually kind of like they did a good job, the publisher, and sort of they may have even used the original image of it looked like a French chateau. And it was perched above the Hudson, not far from where the cloisters are now. So if you can picture that view, that's where the Magdalen Laundry would have been. But it wasn't a fun place to be.
No, it's not like a place to enjoy the view.
No. Even though they do in these articles describe these big windows and that, the women sat and did their sewing and their laundry and they had this beautiful view. But there are women who had been basically arrested and sent there. And there are also articles about women trying to escape, going out the window with sheets tied together. There are articles about riots, that the women rioting. So this fascinated me, and I knew I wanted to do something with it. The idea that what if it still existed and it became this, this. Sorry, I missed that.
It got gentrified.
Yes, exactly. It got gentrified, right? And it was a building like the Dakota or, something, this swanky apartment building. And I just thought that would be an incredible place to set the book.
Absolutely. It's perfect for the story. And so that kind of answers one question, which is after 23 novels, or 22 at the beginning of this, where do you find yourself starting a story? And so you have this Magdalen Laundry, which is shocking and so interesting. Then how do you find the characters? How do you meet them?
Right.
I'm sorry.
I can hear you. I hear that, there's a little mic issue, but I hear you just fine. So again, after 23 novels, like what? What next? What next? And I do occasionally have that little bit of anxiety where I'll think like, what will be next? And then when something comes, it's such a gift, and then I realize, I didn't have to worry about that. Unfortunately, the world is also always providing all these ideas. And so what happened, I'm not sure which came first, the Magdalen Laundry of course I was noticing and like most people observing the Me Too movement and reading about these awful, stories of sexual predators. And yet I was reading about that, but I had not thought that was something I was going to write about, because I thought it was really important and, such an important thing to be happening in our time, but I didn't actually feel a personal connection to it. Through just dumb luck, it hadn't been something I thought I had experienced. So not Me Too. I hadn't actually thought, probably just because I've mostly worked in women-centered industries. So mind you, I've had people, I've had men and women be kind of, unpleasant to me, but hadn't had that experience. But then one day, in 2018, I guess it is, I watched the hearings with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testifying about what had happened to her as a teenager. And when I listened to that, and I know a lot of women I think around the country, around the world, listened to her testimony, which was so eloquent and so informed because she's a psychiatrist, talk about the sequelae, she called it, the after effects of having been attacked as a teenager and as a very young woman, and what that meant for the rest of her life. She talked about panic attacks and claustrophobia. And I found myself crying as I listened to her. But the person I really was thinking of, I was thinking about my mother, who I knew had been attacked when she was young. although she didn't tell me about it till much later in her life. She didn't really go into a lot of detail or talk about it a lot. But my mother had suffered all of these after effects. She had claustrophobia. She had anxiety. She had panic attacks. For my entire life, she slept with the light on, which, you know, and the thing is, you grow up with something like that and you just think it's normal. Doesn't everyone just sleep with the light on? And I never realized, but, you know, afterwards, when she told me about the attack, which happened in a darkened hospital, I thought, oh, that was why. And soon after that, I thought, oh, this is something I need to write about. Because to me, then I felt like I had this personal connection to what women went through and what the lifelong consequences for somebody, and also how those consequences had ended up shaping me, you know, growing up with a parent who, you know, had this anxiety. And so then the story began to take place, form in my mind of a woman who is a reporter who's exposing. That's what my character, Joan Laurie, is doing. She is exposing this powerful man. And then I don't think I'm giving too much away to say she was then attacked on the night that her story went live. And that's why she's looking for refuge, looking for that safe place.
This Me Too moment suddenly happens to her.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more personal.
Yes.
I want to let everyone know that Carol wrote an incredible essay about this sequelae. It's in the back of the book of The Stranger Behind You. It's also in Crime Movies. I read it weekend, and I was reading. It's a beautiful, interesting story, and it's just I can see how this became more informed with The Stranger Behind You, particularly in that intergenerational trauma of you growing up with a mother with this anxiety. And likewise, some of the characters in this novel that are dealing with not just their own trauma, but their parents' trauma or friends' trauma, and just how it connects us and how that distances us. Which leads me to ask about Melissa, which sounds like a weird person. Not talking about myself, but we have Melissa Osgood as the second narrator in Stranger Behind, the wife of the Me Too man. Mm-hmm. And so on the one hand, you have Dr. Ford's testimony influencing you and bringing you to Joan, who's taking this man down. What led you to Melissa?
Okay. When Melissa said, "Oh, and I noticed you have a character with my name," I was like, "Oh yeah." And again, this is what happens if you've written 23 books. I think I've used all the names.
Carol.
People will say, "Oh, were you thinking of so and so?" And I'm like, "No, I was just like, I need another name."
I'm really for that.
Right. I certainly wasn't thinking of you because oddly, I mean, Melissa is the older woman in the story. So it alternates between Melissa and Joan. And Joan is really, I think I can say, Melissa's age.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably exactly. And coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, my daughter's age. So, you know, so that character, and I was excited to tell the story through that young person's point young person's point of view. But as I call you young, and dare I say even millennial, which maybe we'll get into because I know that came up in talking about in your book, Shutter. But what I realized and I started the book just in Joan's point of view. And I think I got about, you know, maybe a third in. Or at least 60, 70 pages, maybe not really a third. And I thought, oh, I've got a problem because
I love those moments.
Sorry?
I love those moments when you you're like, oh,
wait, this is, yeah. I think they are important moments, I think, to talk about as writers, because I sometimes tell my students, or I think beginning writers or people who don't write think like, oh, you know, you get the idea and everything just Yeah. And it's not like that. So I was about 60, 70 pages in, and I thought, okay, I've got a problem, because Joan, because of what's happened to her, understandably, is really suffering from trauma and agoraphobia. She moves to that apartment and she does not want to go out. She gets everything delivered. I had to look up, like, how do the millennial people order food?
Ask me.
I know. Well, now I would. I think I asked my daughter. I think some of my, unfortunately, there are a lot of young people in publishing, so some of them said, no, it would be this, and so she's ordering things in. She's not going out, and this is all written pre-pandemic too. Now, when I look at it now, I think it has some,
It felt really comfortable to me. I was like, yeah, the Refuge seems great. Ordering food.
Right, everything, Amazon packages appear by magic. She doesn't have to go out, and she's writing. She's supposed to be writing a book about an expansion of her article. And then I was like, oh no, I've got this. Oh, and she visits with her 96-year-old neighbor, who was one of the original inmates of the Magdalene Laundry, Lillian. And I thought, okay, I have created a book where two women are sitting in an apartment talking while ordering Grubhub and drinking a fair amount. I thought, I know it sounds fun. I'd be totally down for doing that, especially since she's got a great view. But I thought, this is not good. It's not. I need somebody who can go out. And get into some trouble and move around a bit, because it wasn't the pandemic yet, so I didn't think about people not being able to do that. So Melissa, and then I thought, okay, well, it would be Melissa. It'd be the woman, the wife of the predator. And at first, I was a little resistant to it, because I knew she was a little, she was kind of upper class. She was somebody who was used to having a fair amount of money, lives in Westchester, and she's somebody who apparently has been blind to her, what her husband was doing. And so but I thought, no, she's the point of view I need. I need this. I need to hear, because I was interested in that. What would that mean to somebody to find out, to have their husband exposed as a sexual predator? What would that mean for their life? How would they, relate to their children? Explain that. Would they believe it? So Melissa's journey became just as important to me, another way of coming at this story that I thought was important. And I liked the back and forth then between them, because Melissa goes out, she does stuff. And as I wrote her, I ended up really liking her much more than I thought I would at first, because she's competent. She's somebody who gets things done. And so she goes out and does things that, Joan can't.
She's so pleasantly pushing.
Yes.
Demand things.
Uh-huh.
No, it's something so in the conversation that they have together in this novel is so vital, because you almost can't have your own story without Melissa's in this sense, because I don't think I'm spoiling anything from this novel by saying that so much repercussions are blasted onto Melissa. How could you not see this? You are the wife of a predator.
Right.
So much about the way they're both lives over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And really, so, I think we always ask that when somebody is exposed, what did the women in his life think? What did they know? Do we think that they knew? And what it takes, what it means to have been, if you're genuinely blind to it, why would somebody be blind to it? And I do think there's a lot of ways that people, close their eyes, that they deliberately try not to see something that's in front of them. So I was interested in that too. And then what is it like when their eyes are opened, when they start seeing and understanding? So that, that Melissa's
And this also, so you might have already said this, but I wanted to ask, since our last conversation, we both kind of agree with answers as writers. You know, we kind of see where the novel takes us, which usually means there are a lot of surprises. Were there any more surprises for you, if you can say it without spoiling?
Let me think. Well, first that Melissa, how much I liked Melissa, and the other Melissa. I've always known I liked you. The minute I saw you on the island, I liked you. But I guess exploring her was one of the biggest surprises in writing the book, and and seeing what it was that about her that I really liked, and I think also. Writing Joan, who is a woman in her late 29 or late 20s, early 30s, how much I felt for her as a character, and really did not, although I had to do a lot of checking on generational details, that feeling of being in my late 20s was right there. It was not something I had to search and dig for, but that uncertainty, and that I think in Shudder, I think you do so beautifully, is that you really evoke the that character, that being at sea as a person in their late 20s, and that uncertainty and navigating that world. If I had read Shudder before, I
who Joan would be.
I know I would probably have thought, oh, must not steal this, but Shudder. I mean, I'll hold that up. Can you tell us just a little bit about Shudder so that I
Oh yeah. So Shudder. I'm so sorry. Echoing. I don't know what I saw. Shudder is the story of a young woman who has spent her whole life in her small town in California. She's close with her father, with her boyfriend, not with her mother. She has no great ambition in life. And then her father kills himself, and he's left completely untethered and scared. And so she escapes to New York, and we meet her as she's auditioning for this mysterious, famous, strange indie filmmaker.
Melissa, guys, I don't mean to be the voice of Oz and cut you off there. Your audio is so inaudible, Melissa.
I know. I thought it was just me.
Could you try logging out and then logging back in? And that can sometimes, I'm making sure you have no other browser windows open. And
okay.
That might be helpful because everybody wants to hear what you have to say. And
thank you.
I'm so sorry. I will be.
While you're gone, I'm going to talk about Shudder.
Thank you so much. I'll be right back.
Just log out, log back in, and I'll invite you back up right away.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So while Melissa is doing that, I'm going to talk about Shudder, which is an amazing book, and you should all order it. As she was saying, it has that. It deals with the trauma of a young woman dealing with the suicidal death of her father, and then coming to New York and trying to find, figure out what's next. And that's the part that really that spoke to me, knowing women that age, having a daughter that age, so the character goes to this island off the coast of Maine, and that's where Melissa and I met. We met on an island off the coast of Maine for a writer's retreat. So hopefully she will be back and we can play.
Is this better?
I think so. Talk a little more.
Oh my goodness, it's not echoing back to me.
Oh, okay.
Is it echoing to anyone else?
Not to me. Helen, how about you?
No, that's much better.
That's good.
Oh, thank God.
Thanks for calling that, Helen. I think that's good.
So I should have done this earlier. I'm so sorry.
I was putting it in the chat and hoping you would see it. Then I realized you had the chat hidden. But
all right, we both did. That off.
Now, please tell us about Shudder.
Yes, and I haven't filled in that much, except that she comes to New York.
Okay. So she, thank you so much, Carol. So sorry. So she finds herself in New York. We meet her as she's auditioning for this mysterious, strange, famous indie filmmaker. She's auditioning for his latest film project, where they will be filming on a small private island off the coast of Maine for 1 month. That there is no script. The lines of reality and fiction will be blurred. And obviously this woman is desperate and she says yes. And it's so interesting reading this in conjunction with The Stranger Behind You, this idea of Betty in conversation with Joan. It's if only she had a friend like Joan.
I think they could have helped each other.
Figured some things out together.
Out of that apartment in New York, come with me to Maine, and then maybe we'll go back to that apartment in New York.
Exactly. Like, can you protect me for a little bit?
Yes.
This seems a little bit suspect. Can you help me?
Well, and both of them are navigating this world of powerful men.
Yes.
In your case, or in Betty's case, this powerful film director.
Yeah. And in Jones, this enormously powerful newspaper titan. And not only that, but her boss, Simon, just the power dynamics at play, even in this relationship that is work-based, that's fine. There's still this element of, this is 2019 in the novel, and how are things changing between men and women and how we talk to each other? Particularly, sorry to keep going, but in the scene that you read to us, that small moment with the doorman, that kind of sly look, that feeling of, is that Joan's fear or is he actually transmitting something strange?
Right. How do we read men? How do we navigate, know what is expected of us and what to expect of them as well? And where men hold the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah. No, how much do you have to give of yourself to get in? And is it worth getting in? What happens to you once you're there? And I think in some ways, even with Joan's expose, this incredible takedown, she's still paying an enormous price, not just the attack, but now she is talking to this realtor, and this realtor is saying, oh, that's who you are. It's this, I keep thinking about that phrase, as I write, take what you want and pay for it.
Ah, interesting.
I also teach creative writing as you do, and I talk endlessly about consequences and the consequences of a character's decision, because you always want them choosing something and then realizing these are the consequences. This is the payment for your choice. And I think Betty has to pay a huge price, as does Joan and as does Melissa.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you though, since you were talking about the ages of Joan and Melissa, how did it affect you thinking about Joan as a 29-year-old, thinking as her as your daughter's age? Was there ever this fear of, and I mean, I felt this too writing Betty, like, please don't do that.
Right, stop. Don't go
call someone.
I know, and that is the problem of being a suspense, writing a novel of suspense. Your characters are going to do stupid things. If they don't, they're going to stay home and play. Right, there's no book. And I did often think like, well, I'd be upset if my daughter did this. Although I have, like, my daughter has a little cameo in it where actually she does twice. I have like two different millennials who she, like, that Melissa meets one on the subway and she's very helpful to her, and she's listening to this girl's plan for her future and thinking, I don't know, degree, and that's my daughter. But they have to make choices, as you said, and that's such an important thing, and then pay the consequences. And I think we want to be, especially I feel like as a mother, I want to be protective of my characters, and you can't. You have to let them make their choices and figure it out. And pay what the consequences are. And so I often think about, and tell me if you think about this too, because I think about, if my character's going to do something foolish, which they're going to do at some point, how do I think about that? Like, why are they doing that somewhat fool, the thing that we probably wouldn't do, but they go and do it. So how do you decide, like, or how do you think about, because we don't want to, or we don't want readers to think our characters are, just dumb. They're not.
Just bumbling around.
So how do you think about that?
It's such an interesting, strange dynamic, because so much of, I workshopped this novel in my MFA, and I got so many questions of, why is Betty doing this? Why would she say yes to this? There are red flags everywhere. And so the challenge for me was, like you said, making sure that they understand why she's doing this. She's not stupid. She's uneducated, but she's not stupid. And it's because of this desperation. It's because of this untethered moment in her life. And it's also my question back was always, wouldn't you do it? Because I think I would. I probably would have left at a certain point. A
little sooner, maybe.
Yeah, just a little bit sooner. Probably would have had some more questions. But based on how I packed for our Norton Island retreat, maybe not. I think it said multiple times in the emails, pack for cold weather. I don't think I had a hoodie. So, I think I ultimately would have said yes to this decision, to this offer. But the rest of it was trying to understand what you do in desperate moments. And then the rest of her decisions is just trying to figure out who she is, and also enjoying that kind of feeling of recklessness. Because at that age, like, she's still at 24, so she's still like heading into the late 20s, and she's still feeling pretty like, this is where my life begins. And that's kind of a free feeling.
Yeah.
I think, but that's, how do you deal with it? Because there are so many decisions in this, and there's Melissa, who's making interesting decisions.
Right. First of all, I want to apologize for aging Betty by about 5 years.
Oh, no. It's very similar.
I related her to you and to my daughter's age. But yeah, even when I think about Norton Island, I did pack warm clothes. But then again, I'm a 60-something-year-old woman who went to that island. And I remember taking the boat, we had to meet at a pier. Like, I had to drive 10 hours and then meet at a pier at a certain time, or else the tide was out. And there were parts of me thinking, like, this is kind of crazy that I'm doing this. And that I'm, sort of trusting myself to this, this. But then, we would never have adventures. We'd never do anything if we didn't take those risks. And I think what you do so well with Betty is that we understand where she is because this traumatic thing has happened. And I think, the way trauma, I think in both our books, the way trauma shapes a person and shapes what decisions they make, that's what, the story you're telling. You're saying, this is what happens to people, and it happens all around us. People make all sorts of strange choices. And if you look back and think like, oh, wait, what part of, where in their life did that, where did that come from? Where did that, and that's what interests me. I think it's what interests us in characters is what are those springs? And it's kind of exciting. Yes, Melissa, not to give too much away, moves to that apartment building to, lurk on Joan. But I think when I made that decision, I was, when I realized that's what she was going to do, I was just like, that's crazy. What fun for me as a writer to have her do that. And also she's somebody who's been pushed, who's everything she thought was certain, she's lost. She doesn't, and she doesn't even know who she is anymore. So in a way, it puts her back into that younger frame of mind where, that she where she becomes untethered, and what she might do in order to, and she becomes, I think, obsessed, which we also talked about in our last talk,
Yes.
about how you were talking about how millennials, and you wrote in an article about how millennials often, obsession is a way to find a tether. And am I misstating it, or is that?
No, that's right. It's a way to ground yourself and to protect yourself and to also define yourself. I think so much of these moments of how trauma affects your decision making, it's also how you then have to redefine yourself and what you do, what you decide to do to say, okay, this is who I am now. And so much of Betty's story is, okay, this is who I am now. I'm just going to go become a famous actress, and this is how I'm going to do it. And that's going to show everyone who I am now. And in Joan's case, it's much more, she's reached this height, but it does feel like she's still trying to figure out who she is. I thought that was really incredible to be in true to life, to see her kind of weaving in this trauma, this fear, but also holding on to, okay, I think this is who I am. This is how I've become kind of this champion against this man.
Yeah.
And Melissa's brought back to that as well. It's just, okay, let's figure this out.
Yeah, and hopefully, I think Joan gets a little bit more help than Betty does. Betty kind of
a little bit more. There are more women around her.
Yes. I think Betty she does have to figure it out on her own.
Where was Lillian?
Yes, the kindly 90-year-old woman in the.
Yes.
Lillian wouldn't probably make it too well on that island. But she's pretty tough. Should we see if there are questions? Because I don't want to run out of time. Should we ask Helen?
I think we should go into questions now. So please, could you enter your questions in the chat? We have one to kick off from Joanna, who says, love it. And I have my first question. You have a prologue, and we're always told, don't write prologues, she says in caps. I say, bah, what are your thoughts on prologue?
This is Joanna Schaffhausen, and I should have had her book within reach, Gone for Good. It's just over there. So, and I don't think you don't have a prologue, do you, Melissa?
No, I don't. But I've been thinking about prologues, so this is perfect.
So first of all, I hate anytime someone tells me not to do something. My reaction is, don't tell me what to do. I also had that reaction during the pandemic where people said, don't write a pandemic book now. And I was like, I'm going to do it. But I actually really like prologues, and I don't know why they get such a bad rap. I mean, some of The Secret History has, I think, a brilliant prologue in it. I do think you have to be careful with prologues. I have a few rules about them. They should be short. They should give you something really exciting to look forward to. If it could have just been folded into the book, then you don't need it. So those are the things that I think if you've got that. And for this, I wanted you to see, I wanted you to get a preview. And actually I wanted to start in the apartment building. That was important to me, because that's how I visualized the beginning of the book, that we were there in that, you knew what the refuge looked like. We're there in that building. We see that view. So.
It's almost a moment out of time, too. It's this wonderful moment of reflection before everything kicks in with that killer last sentence of the prologue. I'm not going to give it away, but people should read it.
Thank you.
So, I have a question. Melissa almost pipped me to it. And that is, tell us about peripheral characters are often wonderfully illustrated and very important. Tell us about Lillian.
Oh, my character. Okay, so she is the 96-year-old woman who lives down the hall. And remember, Marla, the realtor, says there's just a 96-year-old neighbor, and so she sort of accidentally comes, knocks on this door by accident, and so Joan brings her in, And she gets all this history. So Lillian was was an inmate at the Magdalene. And she also had, she starts telling these stories to Joan, and she had this amazing history of, in the 40s, of being involved in this, kind of shady mobster world in Coney Island, some of which I should say, I took from my mother's history. So Lillian in some ways is my mother, but my mother kind of, reinvented and a sort of different version of my mother. But she tells the story that I wanted, I guess, to represent a woman of my mother's generation, and what it would have been like to have experienced a sexual assault at that time, what effect that would have on a lifetime. So she's my representative there, and she was just really fun. Every time I got Lillian to come on the screen, I was like, yay. She's pretty much my favorite.
She came in for tea. Melissa, did you have any kind of peripheral characters that served that same purpose, that same role in Shutter? Can you tell us about them?
There is kind of the peripheral character is Betty's mother. She shows up very briefly, but it is my favorite scene of the book. It's one of those moments that it was in the first draft of the novel, and we went through many revisions. I can't stress how many revisions this book went through, how many times I pulled so many characters out, and I got rid of things that I loved, and I was just like, if you you can pry this scene out of my cold dead hands. Like, this is staying. Because I think it's a moment of, this is my excitement as the writer. It's to show you Betty officially saying no to the known world, to go back home with her mother. It shows you how much she is not capable of seeing her mother in any other way except, you're just in my way. You're just being a jerk. You're just reminding me of something terrible. And in that sense, she is also kind of my mother, in the sense that I was a jerk to her a couple of times at that age, where I just was like, why are you here? And it breaks my heart, and I needed to have that kind of apology in there.
Haven't we all?
Plus, there are dogs in it, and that is my favorite part too.
I know, the scene with the mother, I think, is wonderful, and and at the beginning, Betty is just ignoring all her mother's messages, which, as a mother, I attest to, is like, pick up the phone.
She can save you.
Or just at least, this poor woman is, doesn't know where her daughter is, which, speaks to my heart. So it's lovely to think of. I tell my students that when you have a first person narrator, you want a moment where you can look around that narrator. And I think that's a scene where you do that, where we see Betty's point of view, but then we also begin to see the way you've depicted her mother. We begin to see her point of view too.
Oh, thank you. No, I think we were just talking about this in my class actually yesterday or the day before, is how do you show the first person, because they're so limited. And Betty is particularly very biased, and there are moments where Joan and Melissa can be pretty biased. And so it's, how do you understand the motivations of another character? Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that came through, because if anyone thinks that Betty's mother is bad or not a good mother, we need to talk.
I have some things to say about that as well.
Exactly.
We have another question here in the chat, and actually it's for Carol, but it's for both of you. So Carol, you lead us off. What do you think your mother's reaction would have been to have read, to The Stranger Behind You? And more generally, for both of you, do your family members read your books? And if so, what do they think about them and about you being writers?
That's a good question. My mother, and I'm sorry that she wasn't here when I wrote this, but she she was incredibly supportive of my writing. And I had used some of the material from her life in an earlier book, in Seduction of Water. And so I'd had that conversation with her when I said, how do you feel about that? Do you mind if I use these things? And her reaction was, no one will know it's me. It was just, and yet in that book, she's the one thing that, because she read all my books, even my kind of crazy, sexy fantasy books that I wrote for a while. And I could see, like, I remember her calling me once and go like, this isn't quite my cup of tea. But you're a very good writer.
Oh, that's perfect.
But when I wrote that book, Seduction of Water, there was actually a depiction of a woman that was based on my Aunt Leah, who was my mother's sister-in-law, was my father's sister. And I depicted the woman as having, she was a woman who had bad acne as a teenager, so she had pitted skin. And my mother said that would hurt Aunt Leah's feelings if she read that. So I took it out. So, and that was the only thing. My mother didn't have any issues. So I think she would have been okay with Lillian. And my mother, I think, was a very forward-thinking person for, so she was born in 1923, for a person of her time. So I think she would have been okay with it. So, what about you with your family?
Yeah, what about you, Melissa?
I'm sorry. I'm so taken by that answer. I just want to reread this book right now. For me, it's interesting. My father read this the whole way through. Every new iteration, he read it. We talked about it. My mother, she waited until it was fully out, and we just actually, last week had a conversation about it, and I had been telling her, hoping, please read this and see what, a love letter it can be to you. And she read it, and she's like, yeah, I loved it. It was great. It was fantastic. We got to talk about, the various characters, what happens next, and it segued into where can we go, because you went to a creepy place for the first one. Where can we go next for another creepy place?
So she wants to go with you to do the
yeah, she's in it. Meanwhile, I got a very fun message from my grandfather, who had just finished it, and I don't want to spoil anything, but he was very adamant that there has to be a book 2 for more consequences. He wants a lot of stuff to happen.
Well, you tell him to write. He could write that book.
Yeah, I'm like, you can do it. I need a little bit of a break from these people.
I know. Yeah, I don't see. I better pause for a second, because I can see Helen. I think we're.
I'm fine. I was going to jump in and say that was a perfect segue, Melissa, to debut. Oh. Debut. What next?
Oh my goodness, that's what I've been wanting to ask Carol, but I'm afraid that it'll just sound like advice for purely me. Because it's been interesting following this new story. I am working on a new thriller, and it keeps taking me in totally different directions than I expected. It's very different from Shudder, where I knew kind of the whole way through, okay, this is what I'm going for. This is what I want. This one, it's really like learning a new language or learning to love again. But I really wanted to ask you, how does it, and you touched on it a bit, but after, 22, 23, when you finish a novel and you're starting a new one, where does it come from? Where are you? We talked about the Refuge, we talked about the Magdalene, but just how does it feel to transition out of one world into another?
Tough. And I think that, the fact that it feels, and it always feels different. And I think that's great, because I think it is, your first book, they say that the saying is you have your whole life to write your first book and a year to write your second. And then I think I said that to you last time, and you looked very pale.
Yeah.
Said, no pressure. You don't really.
I still think about that.
You don't have to do it in a year, but it is. I think it is different. It's almost like the first book is like, that's a story you had within you. And, and it's still hard to get it, out on the page. but then then you're exploring. I think the next ones, it's like you are going to that next exciting place, and it's scary. I think it never gets easier. Sorry.
Oh God, I don't know. This is also very comforting.
No, it never. I honestly don't think it ever does get easier. I think it's always. Every book I've written, I feel like I'm like on another. Like I told my daughter today when I was driving her back down to the city, I said, with this book, I feel like I got to a place where I was like, I forget what goes in the middle. I was like, well, I know the beginning of this book, I know the end of it, and it's like, what do people put in the middle of books? I can't remember my age or the pandemic.
That thunder! I just realized where I was. You're very self-effacing, Carol, but I know that you have at least 3 ideas kind of percolating back there. I'm sure of it. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, are you working on the next one? Do you have an idea?
I have the book that will come out next year, which is called The Disinvited now, but it takes place on an island off the coast of Maine. And that took me 3 false starts before I got, because I knew I wanted to write about that island. And I tried starting it when we were there. And I kept, every day I would come back from walking around the island and I would tell this lovely group of young people, I found another way to murder somebody. And I was thinking of Agatha Christie, Then There Were None.
Yeah.
And then, but I started it twice and I didn't like it. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, that's why they're on the island. And again, being told not to write your pandemic book. But I ended up, this book, The Disinvited, will be, it's set at 10 years in the future.
Oh, wow.
And sadly, another pandemic. So that sounds a little, but it's on the island. It's on the beautiful island in Maine. So
that's fantastic. I should also point out that not only were you coming back every day saying, in the happiest voice possible, I discovered a new way to murder someone and kind of get away with it. One day, and maybe some of the people in the chat who were there could explain this. One day on the path to most of the cabins, there just was a black leather glove in a puddle, and we all asked each other, like, who does this belong to? And it didn't belong to anyone, and no one knew why it was there. And it was just like, and Carol kept kind of laughing in the background. I should just mention that got a little bit nerve-wracking.
Sherry Byron says it was right outside the door to her cabin. It made a very Well, ladies, on that note, I hear rumblings and I see lightning, and I can hear it on Carol's audio too. And I think before we get shut down by the weather, I would like to thank both of you for writing 2 terrific books that will keep us highly entertained through this summer. If you haven't already bought them and read them, and I highly advise you to do so. Thank you both for such a wonderful discussion. A reminder, you can get signed copies at oblongbooks.com, or the audiobook, as I explained. Before I close, I'd like to express our thanks to Christina Joel of William Morrow Publishing and Lauren Jaggers of Berkeley Books, who have helped make this event possible.
Yay.
And thank you to all of you in the audience who took time out of your evening to join us on Crowdcast. And good night, Carol. Good night, Melissa. We wish you well. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It was fun. Thank you, Ellen.
Truly,
Thank you, Melissa.
No, thank you, Carol.
See you on the island soon.
Very soon, next year.